Good evening. My name is Michelle Stempian, Education and Community Programs Manager at the Holland Museum, and I use the pronouns she and her. Thank you for joining us virtually this evening for the second program about the photographic work of artist James Cook. Before we get started, even though we are not physically together this evening, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the space that the Holland Museum and the Capon and Settlers House Museums occupy. The Holland Museum surrounds Lake Makatawa, ancestrally known to the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Peoria nations as Makatugami, or Black Lake. Each nation has their own rich cultural traditions and beliefs that still survive today. We, the Holland Museum, acknowledge that this land is sacred, and we commit to honoring the land and the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded it for generations through continuing education, partnerships, and self-reflection. Thank you. Now, some information and announcements to share. This program is being recorded. Please remain on mute throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, you may enter them in the chat and we will share them during the Q&A following the presentation. Links to the program recording and a program survey will be emailed tomorrow to our program participants. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts about this and future programs. As we continue our discussion of the photographic portraits by James Cook, I just wanted to highlight the exhibition that is currently on view and encourage you, if you have not already, to visit Contemporary Portraits of Native Americans by James Cook, a collection of 25 color photographs which offer a glimpse into the faces of Native people from across the United States. Stories of family, tradition, and resilience will resonate with visitors as they view photographs as vibrant as the people portrayed. We wish to thank our collaboration sponsor, Horizon Bank, media sponsors WGVU, PBS, and NPR, and the Michigan Arts and Culture Council and the National Endowment of the Arts for their continuing support of our exhibitions and the associated programs. Just a reminder that the museum's current hours are Mondays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 10 until 5, and we are always open the second Monday of the month in the evening from 4 to 7 for free. I also wanted to highlight some great programs that we have coming up in the next month. Our next Tales from the Archives program, celebrating stories of local history, will be on Thursday, March 10th at 7 p.m. at the Holland Museum, and will feature 3 current Hope College students discussing important stories of previous female Hope College students leading during crises in the 1930s and 40s. This is a free talk, but donations are encouraged and masks will be required. Celebrate Reading Month with our Authors Night on Monday, March 14th from 4 to 7 p.m. This program is co-organized with Empowering Youth Global Connection. Visitors will enjoy activities in Spark Lab, including bookmaking, plus readings by featured local authors in the galleries. This is a free Second Monday program, and our free admission is sponsored by the Meyer Foundation. And all ages are welcome to this program, and masks are required. And on Thursday, March 31st at 7 p.m., we will welcome back Elizabeth Chivis Pigeon, who will talk about many Anishinaabe traditions that continue to connect Native communities to the land. This talk will be on Zoom and is free. And of course, you can learn more about each of these programs and register at hollandmuseum.org. And as we continue to offer these programs at little or no cost, so we can be as accessible as possible to the community, we hope you will support our efforts with a donation to the Holland Museum. And thank you. So now on to tonight's program as we welcome back artist James Cook. And of course it says on there 1 of 2, and this is 2 of 2. This evening, Jim will discuss his photo documentary of Wounded Knee and some of his more recent projects. If you were not with us for the first talk, let me introduce Jim again. Following graduation from Southern Illinois University with degrees in both photography and journalism, Jim started his career as a freelance photojournalist in Denver, Colorado, where for the next few decades, he covered the Rocky Mountain region, writing and shooting for Time, Newsweek, Business Week, Forbes, the Washington Post, the LA Times, and many others. Jim also served as a board member and a national officer of the American Society of Media Photographers, where he worked to influence business standards for professional photographers and copyright legislation, including testifying before the US Senate. In 1984, Jim began his photo documentation of contemporary Native American life, which continues today. His portraits of the people of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, gained national attention when PBS sent a crew to film him at work. The Smithsonian Institute purchased some of Jim's prints for their permanent collection in the National Museum of the American Indian and for the traveling exhibit Song for the Horse Nation. In 2005, Jim and his wife Pat chose to move to Saugatuck, where he continues to photograph the Michigan Lakeshore, and his documentation of Native Americans continues here, resulting in several of the images in the exhibition currently on view at the Holland Museum. Thank you again for being here, and Jim, and for sharing your inspiring work and story with us. So everyone, welcome back, Jim Cook.
Thank you. Good to be here again. Thank you for everybody showing up. Let me get my screen sharing going here. So you should see that now. According to the 1980 US Census, Shannon County, South Dakota, since renamed Lakota County, was the poorest place in the United States. Wounded Knee was right in the middle. A bit of history is needed here. Historically, the Lakota Sioux were nomads. As hunters, they roamed the northern Great Plains following the buffalo, Tatanka, most powerful tribe on the plains by the 1850s. In 1868, they were forced onto the Great Sioux Reservation, which took up most of what is today, or about half of what is today, South Dakota. 9 years later, during the gold rush for the Black Hills, a major part of the reservation was taken away. This was the most sacred part of their land. Beef rations were cut by Congress, more of the reservation was taken away, and times got very hard for them. In 1890, Minneconjou Lakota chief Bigfoot and a few hundred of his followers went off the reservation at Standing Rock, fleeing to Pine Ridge. En route, they were massacred by the 7th Cavalry at Wounded Knee. Yes, the 7th Cavalry that we know from Little Bighorn in 1876. In 1973, Russell Means and about 200 members of the American Indian movement occupied Wounded Knee. They were protesting and trying to call attention to bad conditions and treatment on the reservation. As a freelance photojournalist working in Denver at the time, I saw story potential based on the history and the poverty. This is the resulting photo essay from the 80s and the 90s. I had absolutely no idea what to expect. It was about a 5.5-hour drive out of Denver, about 350 miles. When I got there, I found a few clusters of HUD houses in the middle of nowhere. HUD being Housing and Urban Development, federal housing, government housing. I pulled up in my near new Mazda, got out wearing my nice white Reeboks and my flashy cameras, and was immediately a magnet for the kids and the drunks. I had people coming and asking me for money and handouts. The kids wanted to play with my cameras and everything. And this Wage, a white guy, panicked, tucked tail, and fled. It took me 2 weeks to overcome my shame and embarrassment and get myself to go back. So what did I find there? Well, they had a post office. As you can see here, this is the temporary post office. The sign shows that it's been temporary for a little bit of time at this point. At that time, the population was just under 300 people. In the meantime, they have built a new post office. I pulled this photo off the internet. This was built in about the 90s, but this is what's replaced the temporary post office at Wounded Knee. There wasn't much for the kids. At the end of one of the little streets, they had built their own little basketball court, put it together, and that was about all the recreational activity they had in Wounded Knee. They did have a swimming hole in Wounded Knee Creek. And anytime the weather was hot, you'd find plenty of kids hanging out there. And otherwise, they just had lots of wide open prairie to play in, to roam in, whatever. One thing I didn't find was any place to stay. I had to drive about 30 miles to Nebraska to get to a motel. So after a couple of visits, I decided, well, there's got to be a better way. There was a lot of open land, and I found out, yeah, it'd be fine. It would be okay for me to camp there. So on one of my next trips, I set up a tent, and I went out for the day to meet some people. When I returned, all I found were my tent poles and a few little shards of fabric hanging from them. My tent had been eaten that day by grasshoppers. They actually ate a nylon tent. I did find the only business in Wounded Knee, and that was a used tire shop run by Ben Littlemoon. There really were no other businesses. This was it. Need a tire? Come see Ben. And of course, there's the cemetery and the mass grave of the 1890 victims. It was not uncommon at all to see ceremonies taking place there. But I was there to look into the lives of the people. What was it like to live in America's poorest place? So I started in the little clusters of HUD homes. There was about 3 little streets, a few dozen homes altogether. One of the first people that I met and got to know was Ruth Blackbear. At this point, she was 65 years old. She was poor, but she was running a decent, respectable household. Over the years, I visited Ruth many times. She was almost always busy sewing. She's living in one of those HUD houses, and hers was in better shape than most. I have no idea who had lived there before or what the condition was when she moved in, but it was relatively clean and organized based on everything I saw with any of them. She had posters on the wall for Ogallala Lakota College. Last Supper is there. Jesus is the shepherd. Interesting combination of things, but always busy sewing. Here she's putting together another one of her patch quilt blankets. Here she is hanging the hand-washed clothing. I always brought back pictures. I came back with pictures from my last visit. They had no money for cameras and film, and if they did, there was no place to get it developed and prints made. And because of the history of Wounded Knee, Ruth said many people had come and taken pictures, but I was the only one to bring pictures back, and she loved that, as did most of them. They became pretty much, for a lot of them, the only pictures they had of themselves. She told me about her life, how it had been. She talked about when she was in school and they would be punished if they got caught speaking Lakota or doing anything that reflected their Native American culture and heritage. But after World War II, things started changing, and by the time I was there, they had regained a lot of freedom and were being allowed to be natives again, to live their lives again as they chose. She enjoyed teaching me useful Lakota words, such as "Ai Kui," hello, "Pila Maya," thank you, "Washte," good, or an easy one, "Iha," laugh. This was one of the last times I visited with Ruth. At this point, she was 71 years old. This is Ruth's daughter, Alberta, with her 2 sons. They were good kids, clean, happy. It was a close family. They spent a lot of time together. This is Alberta cooking dinner in the kitchen. In the background, you can see deer jerky hanging to dry. You'll notice a well-seasoned coffee pot in the foreground. You haven't had coffee until you've had Indian coffee. They keep the pot on all the time. And whenever it starts to run dry, you add another handful of grounds, top it off with some water, and keep it going. It's coffee. Another good friend over the years was Leola One Feather. In 1989, my project had gotten some attention, and PBS sent a film crew out to cover me at work. I was taking photographs of some kids riding horses in a field. Leola saw us and she pulled over to say hi. Leola was a single mother with several kids. She knew this was a funny scene. So did I, so did the PBS crew. Got a lot of coverage. They made it on national TV. Like the others, Leola was poor. She lived in the HUD houses. She was well educated, though, with a college degree, and she was industrious. She created items routinely that would be sold in Rapid City or the Black Hills to tourists. But she lived there because she wanted to be with her people. She wanted to be among her folks, her culture. This was the case for many of them. She was always talking with her kids, especially teaching them about their heritage. She was proud of being Lakota, and she wanted them to be proud too. Here she's getting one of her daughters ready for a powwow. She had a garden where she grew fresh vegetables in order to feed her family a healthier diet. Someone else I came to know is Clayton, jealous of him. He's a World War II vet. He was very proud of it. Clayton was affable and always full of stories. He had a problem with alcohol, though, which was all too typical. He comes from a life of nothing to do, no jobs nearby, no town nearby, unemployment around 90%. His household felt full of despair. There were 13 people lived in this house, which is not atypical of the houses in the community there. Clayton's house had broken windows that all patched up with plastic instead, but I don't think there was a single window in the house that had glass left in it. I asked Ruth Blackbear how she would ask him about his windows. I don't remember the whole phrase. We rehearsed it a lot to make sure that I got it right, but I do remember that the word for window is ojajatlepi. But when the PBS crew was there, I was talking to Clayton outside of his house, and obviously with a film crew and me with the cameras and everything, we attracted a small crowd. They clustered around to watch. And I got to the right moment and I made my statement. I asked Clayton about what had happened to his windows. And I was very pleased. I knew that I had said it just the way Ruth had me rehearse it. But everybody cracked up. They all started laughing. They thought it was so funny. I turned to the guy standing next to me and I said, "Didn't I say that right?" And he said, "Well, it's funny to hear you speaking like a woman." Because I had asked Ruth how she would ask him about his windows, and they actually have a male and a female dialect. So she had told me how she would ask, which was with the female dialect. Live and learn. This is Adolf Holohorn and his wife, another poor but upstanding household in the HUD houses. They were proud of their son's athleticism. You can see his basketball trophies in the background. Even here, though, I just felt a pervasive sadness. This is their son. He was proud to show off his newborn. He was a very happy father. You'll notice on his chest, there are some scars. Those are from sun dancing. Sun dancing is where they actually typically use bones. They penetrate their chest, they pierce their chest with the bones and tie it by rawhide to the top of a pole. And they dance in the sun and seeking a vision, and they dance until they can pull themselves free. This is also practiced by women. Away from the cluster of HUD homes, many had homes on their own land. There were several small houses scattered across the countryside. I saw them change over the seasons, over the years. I saw them evolve, sometimes for better, sometimes for the worse. I've always enjoyed this outhouse with a view. I could imagine easily sitting there with the door open, taking it in at the right season. Certainly in the wintertime, I don't know that I'd even want to be out there at all. This is one of the houses out on their own land. This is the home of Roy, jealous of him, the brother of Clayton. This is Catherine and Roy, jealous of him. They're always warm and welcoming on every visit. They seemed truly happy to see me every time I would show up. They'd come out and greet me, and we would, I don't know, we'd talk. They were quiet people, but we enjoyed each other's company. I did most of the talking, I suppose. They had no running water, no electricity, but optimistically had conduit and wires reaching skyward from the roof. And about half a mile away in the distance, you could see the power lines going by that they were hoping some way to connect to. This is a portrait of Roy. As I mentioned, a quiet, gentle man. Didn't have a lot to say, but just always seemed to enjoy hanging around together. Catherine in the house. The whole time I was taking pictures of her, she was just sitting there, the same expression, but giggling because she was pleasantly uncomfortable being photographed. They had a wood-burning stove for heat and cooking. I don't know how they managed in the winter or where they got adequate wood. Winters are hard there. They had so little, but I never heard them complain about it. Of course, it was little by my standards. I have no idea what they felt about how much they had or didn't have. Again, they never complained about it to me. This is Wilbur Hunt's horse. I was there on this day when he was putting in a garden, or trying to. The Sioux had been hunters. Scratching the ground to plant seeds was not dignified. It wasn't the thing that a hunter or a warrior would do. But regardless, on the reservation that they got, it's semi-arid land, poor soil. It's not crop friendly, not the kind of place where you can grow crops easily. Wilbur, his wife, and 3 children lived in this house. Like everybody else there, they welcomed me in. They were always very cordial. This is his older daughter and a few of the cats. This is his youngest daughter. His wife preferred not to be photographed. I accepted and respected that. This is Margaret Blackweasel. She taught at a school in Porcupine that was just up the road from Wounded Knee. And she influenced me more than she'll ever know. She said many people were working hard to make good lives and to teach the children their history and their ways. She said I should do a story on that. And I have. If you saw my presentation 2 weeks ago, you know that I have been doing that. One such person was Walter Littlemoon, born and raised in Wounded Knee, but now he lived in Denver, or at this time he lived in Denver. He founded the Tyosh Bay Crisis Center. Tyosh Bay means Camp Circle. In Denver, he collected donated furniture, clothes, appliances, tools, seeds, goats. And as far as I could tell, he spent his life driving back and forth between Wounded Knee and Denver to take care of his community, to take care of his people. Newsweek ran a story with photos that I did about Walter in their annual July issue on Unsung American Heroes. I was thrilled to give him that attention. And I know that after that, a lot of additional donations came in. This is a used ambulance that was donated from Greenwich, Connecticut. Now, because they're poor, doesn't mean they don't have skilled individuals among them. I know of one guy that was an EMT from LA. He had lived there as an ambulance and worked as an ambulance driver, but he missed his people. He missed his culture. And he was tired of the racism that he encountered in Los Angeles. So he moved back to the reservation, moved back to Wounded Knee, and went back to a poor life, but one that apparently suited him better. But there they had at least one of their EMT drivers for the ambulance. I was with Walter when he delivered goats to a lot of the families. He felt that fresh milk would be valued. To Walter's dismay, a lot of the goats became fresh meat, which was also valued. You may recognize this from earlier. This is Wilbur Hunt's house and two of his daughters. I don't know that they actually slaughtered their goat. I just know that some of them were slaughtered for food, for meat. I showed you earlier the Ola One Feather dressing her daughter for a powwow. This is her oldest daughter, her oldest child, pitching in to help get her ready for it. Wounded Knee hosts a powwow every summer. Compared to other powwows I've been to, it's very modest, but it's far more traditional. It's truly a community effort. Walter and Ben Littlemoon, you remember Ben from the used tire shop, and a few others built the shade out of pine branches and timbers. Notice the flags. They're very proud to be American. They're very proud of their veterans, in spite of their history. Ruth Blackbear and others brought food and cooked it, and they fed all comers for free. Clayton, jealous of him, was the MC. At one of these powwows, I was roaming around taking pictures of things that caught my attention, and I came across this couple sitting under the shade. That's the piece that I showed you a moment ago that was built as a semicircle around the dance area, around the powwow area. But I saw this couple sitting there and thought that was interesting, and I'd like to get a picture of them. The drums were loud, so I couldn't actually ask them, but I motioned with my camera and expressed the idea that I'd like to take a picture, and the man nodded, obviously giving me permission. So I took a couple of shots and I moved on. Many years later, I was going through a lot of my old photos, and I came across this and I thought, wow, this is really a neat shot. I should do something with it. But I didn't know who they were, so I contacted Walter Littlemoon, who is back at Wounded Knee, and asked him if he knew who this was. And he goes, oh yeah, that's Frank Fool's Crow. Oh, of course, Frank Fool's Crow, whoever that is. Meant nothing to me at the time. But I did some research and I was amazed to find out who this actually was. And I realize now this is probably one of my more significant images. Read this to you. Frank Fool's Crow was a Lakota Sioux spiritual leader, a Yuapipi medicine man, and the nephew of Black Elk. He was instrumental in negotiating the armed standoff of Wounded Knee in 1973 and the subject of a biography by Thomas Males. Raised in the traditional way, he did not attend the white man's school as his father did not approve, which is why he could not speak fluent English. As a young man, he traveled around the United States with the Buffalo Bill Cody Wild West show. He spent much of his life serving his people as a medicine man, healer, and a teacher. His first wife, Fanny Afraid, died in 1954. He's shown here with his second wife, Kate, who died in October 1988. He died in 1989. His exact age was not known, but he was believed to have been 99. On December 29th, 1990, on the centennial of the historic massacre, more than 350 mounted riders approached Wounded Knee to observe the end of 7 generations of mourning. I was determined to get photos, and I managed to get myself positioned in their path. The contingent was preceded by a vanguard, and they were surprised to see me, a lone photographer, standing out there in the middle of the prairie. You couldn't see my car, which was over a ridge with my assistant. So it was just me standing out there all by myself. So they stopped to see if I was okay. There was good reason for them to check on that. It was cold. It was blowing snow, and the wind chill temperatures were around 54 below zero. There are a lot of photo-related stories to tell with this as well, but that's not the purpose here today. The ride was begun in 1986 by 19 riders. It was a 191-mile journey through the Badlands in the middle of winter. They were following the route of Bigfoot and his people on their flight from Standing Rock to Wounded Knee. I stood my ground. The horses, I knew I was going to be okay. The horses came forward and trotted past me, but I could actually feel the earth shaking as they trotted by. It was an incredible experience to feel it and just see that many horses and riders all at one time. There are also runners among them. Everybody was frozen, but when I felt all that I had gotten what I could with the camera, I couldn't resist turning and running too for as long as I could. The culmination was a commemorative ceremony at the cemetery. If you can see it in the background, there are horses and people surrounding the entire cemetery. Again, this is the 100th anniversary of the massacre, where the number is debated, but it was between 150 and 300 people were killed by the 7th Cavalry. Men, women, and children. Today, with the invasion of Ukraine, it makes me wonder how much more advancement our civilization requires. This is a photo that has ended up representing that historic day. This is Arvo Looking Horse, Virgil Killstraight, Dan Afraid of Hawk leading the rest of the riders. I came to know Virgil in subsequent years. I didn't know him at the time I took this, but I got to know him later and talked with him several times. I still have a favorite T-shirt that he gave me that has a buffalo head on it and a nice slogan, Wo Lakota, which means good things to the people. A print of this photo is on display in the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. And it's been on tour in one of their traveling exhibits, A Song for the Horse Nation. And with that, I thank you for your time. Pila Maya.
Thank you, Jim. That was amazing. Muted. There we go. To see. Thank you so much. That was amazing to see all of those images and see one that was familiar from the exhibit as well, but also hear the stories of all of these amazing people who live there. So if you have some questions, we hope you do. Please put those into the chat and we will read those for Jim. If you have some questions, go ahead and put those in. Give everyone a moment. See my daughter in her pajamas. And now she's waving. Any questions from our audience? Oh, here comes one. Well, first a comment. What a powerful program. Thank you. And does have a few questions. It's from Ricky. Thank you, Ricky. Did you see the sun dancing performed?
I did not. I've been to a number of different kinds of ceremonies, but not sun dancing. I was actually invited to try it and I declined.
It's wonderful they invited you to participate though, because I know there are quite a few rituals, of course, that are very private, and so it's wonderful that they included you.
Well, in the process, I had to learn a lot of proper behaviors. Like when I went to visit a medicine man, I needed to know that I should bring coffee or tobacco as a gift. There were certain things you just don't photograph, or you wait until it's clear that you can. A lot of times as a photographer, you spend a lot of time visiting with people before you bring out the camera. Just make sure they're comfortable with you. I was thrilled at how I was able to become a fly on the wall in many of those households. They just got so used to me. And as with Ruth Blackbear, just knowing her over the years, seeing her change, it's amazing when I look back at the photos to see the difference from when I first photographed her until later, just her aging.
Yes.
And now I see some of those little kids in there, and I realize from when I did some of those photos, these kids now, the littlest ones, are in their later 30s. And I just have to wonder how they've done. I do know that conditions in Wounded Knee have improved a little bit, but not by that much. The same houses are there. There are a few more of the HUD houses than there were, but it's still much the same. And I don't know that there's anybody I would try to blame so much as just observing what the situation is and understanding that I got the sense from so many of them about their desire to be with their people, to be there in spite of the poverty. But there's nothing nearby. There are no towns. There's just no job opportunity. So it is a very idle life and not a great place to try and farm.
Wow. I mean, actually, I am going to get to the other questions. A bunch of popped in, but I did actually had a question myself. I mean, when you arrived, was it what you expected, or were you incredibly surprised by the conditions and the poverty that you saw?
The first time I went there, I felt like I was a hardened photojournalist. I had been under bridges in Denver with the homeless, where I disguised myself as homeless myself with a lumpy coat with my cameras under it. So I felt like I was hardened and I was ready to face anything. But it was overwhelming. That's what I mean, that I fled the first time I went there. I got there and I was out of place. I was badly dressed for the situation. Fortunately, I had a second car, an older car, so the next time I went, I drove that instead of this nice shiny Mazda. And I didn't wear my real nice Levi's and Reeboks and the whole bit. I went back not trying to look like I was poor too, but I went back not looking so flashy. But yeah, the first time I was absolutely overwhelmed. It was beyond anything I expected or had experienced. And I had no refuge because I was there all by myself. And kind of at first, I had drunks coming out of the woodwork to ask me for money. I didn't know how to handle it. And it was way beyond anything I experienced or expected. And some of the houses, I showed you Clayton's household. Some of those houses, you got into those, and it took a little while to just accept that there are 13 people living in this house and in this bad condition, what I perceive to be a bad condition.
Right. Wow. Okay. So another comment, what a great presentation. And then another question, why do you feel called to share the story of Indigenous people?
I was originally called because I was a freelance photographer. That's how I made a living, was by finding stories to work on and then convince somebody to publish them and pay me. Once I got into this one, though, it took a hold of me. It has since become a good chunk of my life, my experience, and just something I now take a lot of pleasure out of continuing. I have no idea where it's going, what it will end up being, but I just love doing it and continue contributing to the body of work. I don't necessarily pursue trying to show the poverty or the misery anymore. Although if I run into it, I certainly wouldn't avoid it. But I'm really more interested in just helping document Native American life in America today to all degrees. You'll also, in telling it a few times, I referred to Indians, which I know a lot of people go, wait a minute, can you call them Indians? Isn't Native Americans the proper term? Yeah, most of the time, the politically correct answer is Native Americans, but Russell Means pointed out that anybody who's been born in North America is a Native American, is a Native American, and he preferred Indians. So I don't feel like I'm offending anyone, and I feel quite confident. At Wounded Knee, they refer to themselves as Indians all the time. So I don't think it's an offensive racist term to use. Thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you. Yes. When is the last time you were there?
The last time I was in Wounded Knee was in 1991. So it has been a while. I have visited it online using Google, where you can go and do the street view from time to time just to see how much it has or hasn't changed. That's where I got the picture, by the way, of the new post office.
Okay. Can you talk a little about alcoholism within the Indigenous community? I had always heard that Native Americans have a predisposition based on their biology to become addicted to alcohol. Is that urban legend?
I don't know that I'm qualified to answer to that degree. I know that in Wounded Knee, with the high percentage of unemployment and no place to go, nothing to do, that it certainly lends itself very well to alcohol. They get the monthly checks from the government. A couple of people load into a car and head 30 miles to Nebraska where they can hit the liquor store, and they do a booze run and bring it back to the community. And I think anyone could fall into alcoholism under those conditions. So whether they have a physical propensity for it or not, the conditions that they're living in certainly lend themselves to it. How many of us know someone who has alcohol problems and knows how hard it is to overcome it? It's a terrible disease, and this is a place where it has a great opportunity to dig some deep roots.
Did seeing the reservation in person change the way you thought about Indigenous people in this country?
Yeah, when I started it, I'm not sure I knew much about them whatsoever. In my last program, I started out with the bit about I grew up watching the 1950s TV, and what I knew about Native Americans was from watching Tonto on the Lone Ranger and Gene Autry and all the Western shows we had. That was pretty much what I knew about Native Americans then. As I got started in Wounded Knee, I started learning a lot more about those on the reservation, but that also in turn led me to know a lot more of them in Denver, where I lived at the time. I had the family portrait that I showed last time, which is where I started on this project to a large degree in doing the portraits. And it was then that I started finding out that there were like 20,000 or so living in Denver, and I never would have known it. They're leading lives just like anybody else in Denver, although many of them would powwow on the weekends or do other things reflecting their heritage and taking advantage of the opportunities to get together with others that also shared that heritage and the desire to revive their culture. Here in Michigan, we've got a lot of Native Americans living here too, and for the most part, they're invisible to us, and that's fine. I don't think they have to stand out, but it's good to know, just like we know we've got a lot of Dutch in the area, we've got a lot of Germans, we've got a lot of English, we've got a lot of Blacks, we've got a lot of Native Americans. We're a diverse culture. And the more we accept and understand one another, the better we all do for
it. Is the AIM still active today?
I know it still exists. I'm not sure about how active it was. In the 90s, it was still quite active. I was involved, well, not involved with it, but I dealt with a number of the individuals who were prominently involved in it, who lived in Denver. And I would have to look online to find out exactly how active it is. I know it still exists, but how much they're doing, I'm not sure. One of their main objectives in Denver was to end the annual Columbus Day parade, because it was, in their eyes, a celebration of genocide of the European culture coming to North America and wiping out the Native Americans. They didn't think it was something to be celebrated. So that it's become a more wide-ranging cultural event rather than Columbus Day. And it started in Denver, by the way, which is why they were protesting it there.
Oh, interesting. So next question, have you ever been back to Wounded Knee in the winter besides to photograph the anniversary of Men and Horses?
I was there a couple of times in the winter. That was certainly the worst winter. It was terrible. The cold, the bitterness. I was saying there's some photography stories. Among them, one is that I had a couple of cameras. We used film at the time, and one of my cameras, I advanced the film too fast, and I couldn't use it anymore because the film shattered inside the camera. It was just all little fine pieces of plastic in there. So that camera was out of use because I advanced the film too fast. So the temperatures definitely brought on some strange things. That the highways back and forth to Denver were hell during one winter storm. So I didn't go there a lot in the winter. It wasn't a time I was eager to go there. I do know that some people really struggle to stay warm in the winter there, and I know in some cases they were breaking down furniture and burning it to get heat.
Wow. So this is a comment from Annie that she is close friends with Myron Puri. I'm not going to pronounce that right. Poirier Black, who's Black Elk's great grandson. He lives in Porcupine. He helped to get Harney Peak named Black Elk Peak. It might be good to encourage people. So this is for our audience. To read about Black Elk and his great vision. So I'm assuming you're referring to the book Black Elk Speaks, which I did read in college. And if you're not familiar with it, it is an amazing read. So would encourage.
It is. It's a very there are a number of books. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is also another one I think is worth reading. There are a lot of good books on the topic. I think in the end, it all just keeps coming back down to when can we learn to tolerate one another? When can we let our cultures accept that ours isn't the only culture worth having?
Absolutely. When you first developed relationships with members of the community, how did you approach your reason for being there?
I don't remember in great detail, but I went in there. I didn't go and knock on doors. I usually met people when I saw them outside their house. Walking up to a house and knocking on the door just wasn't my way of doing it. But if I saw somebody out and about, I'd go over and I'd say hi, smile, and a big grin always helps. Just got to make sure that I let them know I'm harmless enough. And tell them I'm up there working on a story, that I'm trying to do a photo story, in this case about Wounded Knee. And would they mind if I took some pictures? And I don't think I ever got really turned down. Everybody was very nice. They were always very, very cordial people. But, again, it comes down to a good grin helps. And it was good too when I mentioned that Ruth taught me a few useful words, and be able to say thank you, or that's good, wash day. There are a couple of words I used a lot, and they didn't mind it. They liked it that I was using some of it. I wasn't trying to be a wannabe Indian, but and they knew that, but they appreciated that I was at least doing a little bit of taking in their language and participating to that degree. Some of the powwows at Wounded Knee, as a matter of fact, I mentioned Clayton Jelsingham was the MC. They frequently hardly used English at all. It would be done in Lakota. And it was interesting just to hear this whole event. He's up there with a microphone and over the loudspeakers, and it's just all Lakota. Once in a while, there would be something that they would feel was necessary to share in English too, but they were being themselves.
Wow, amazing stories. So a final comment, the pictures of the memorial of the massacre are just incredible. And to hear that it was 54 degrees below zero is striking. Which doing anything at 54 degrees below zero, oh my goodness. Yes, incredible.
I think it's the coldest I've ever experienced personally.
Yeah, brutal. And to think that that's probably fairly regular, weather for them. And as you mentioned, often, maybe perhaps burning their own furniture to stay warm.
Well, we're talking about the prairies, and there's not much to stop the wind. It comes in from Canada and across North Dakota, across South Dakota, just as in the play Oklahoma, they sing and the wind comes sweeping across the plains. Yeah, it sure does. There are times when you wouldn't believe the wind that would come through up there.
Oh, another question just popped in. What do you want to photograph next involving the Native Americans?
My real ambition is at this point is to just try and photograph more nations. There are over 500 Native American nations in the United States, over 500 acknowledged nations, and I've only done a handful. So I would love it if at some point I could get out and visit some other parts of the country and photograph some other people. I love it when I can find the artists working on their projects that are somewhat traditional, if they will, but it's not for me to decide what art they should be doing. And I can get their regalia, so I can photograph them in their clothing. I would love to be doing more of that. With COVID, it's kind of reduced my travels a little bit too, but.
Yes, absolutely. Any further questions from our audience? I'll give you another minute if there's anybody else who wants to jump in and ask something before we start to close things for this evening. All right, so I think we are finished for this evening. And so thank you again to all of you for being here with us this evening. And thank you again to Jim for telling us all of these amazing stories and helping us to gain a greater understanding and knowledge of these Native people and learn more about them. You're exactly what you said. We need to know more about the other cultures so that we can all be together and just make things better. And so we just appreciate you so much for your time and your expertise and all of the beautiful images. And again, I encourage everyone to come down and see the images in person at the Holland Museum. The exhibition is open until June 20th. So you have some time, but don't wait too long and come and see these images in person. So some thank yous in our chat to you, Jim, for your time again.
Thank you.
And,
my pleasure.
We just appreciate you so much. Thank you. And thank you all. And we'll sign off and everyone have a great evening and stay safe.